The ballpark in Manitowoc leaned toward the lake as if it were tired of holding itself up. A sag of timber and chicken wire, bleachers bleached bone white by wind off Lake Michigan. The place always smelled faintly of brine and stale tobacco. On certain evenings, when the fog rolled in low and slow, the outfield fence disappeared entirely, swallowed whole, so that a long fly ball seemed less like sport and more like a vanishing act. It was 1933 or 34. Years ran together back then like cheap whiskey in a cracked glass, and the Manitowoc septics took the field in uniforms the color of old dishwater, stitched and restitched until the seams puckered like healed wounds. Their catcher, Brewer Jones, crouched behind the plate with a nervous geometry to him, angles where a man ought to have been smooth. Brewer had quick hands. That was the first thing anyone noticed. Not steady, never steady, but quick, like he was always catching up to something just a half second ahead of him. When the pitcher wound up, Brewer would twitch, just a flicker at the shoulders, a tightening in the jaw, as though the pitch had already been thrown somewhere inside his head, and he was bracing for the echo. They said the Benzedrine kept him sharp. That's what he said, too, when anyone asked. Keeps the world from dragging, he'd mutter, rubbing his thumb along the seam of a baseball until the skin there went raw and white. But the truth of it showed itself in small betrayals. The way he'd lunge at change-ups like a starving dog snapping at a hand, or chase a high fastball into the upper reaches of nothing, swinging at ghosts no one else could see. A bat cracking through the air would make him flinch. It was worse, not always, but enough. Enough that runners took liberties. Enough that pitchers stopped trusting him, their eyes lingering too long on the dugout between innings. Enough that the crowd, sparse and practical people that they were, began to murmur in that low Midwestern way that carried farther than shouting. Boys got the yips, someone would say. Boys got worse than that, another would answer. On warm nights, when the lake breeze died and the air settled thick against the skin, you could smell the whole town pressed in around the field. Coal smoke, spilled beer, damp wool, and something sweeter, rot adjacent, drifting up from the marsh beyond left. They tried him at first base eventually. He stood there like a man resigned to his own afterlife, watching the game happen at a distance. The arm that once snapped throws to second like gunfire had no place here. It hung at his side, almost embarrassed. First base was for men on their way up or on their way out, and Brewer had the uneasy distinction of being both at once, promising enough to move, broken enough to stay. And when the road trips bent south toward Sheboygan, where the neon hummed low and steady and the houses kept their curtains drawn even in the heat, Brewer found other ways to quiet the noise in his blood, places where a man could disappear for an hour or a night and come back with less of himself than he'd left with. By the time the septics returned home, Brewer Jones would be thinner, quicker, worse, his eyes bright as struck matches, his swing a fraction too early, his body already reacting to a pitch that hadn't yet been thrown, like he was living just ahead of the present and losing ground all the same.